Welcome back to yet another episode of Engage. Ryan Argenta here with
Laura Woods.
Welcome back. Today we're here with the Scope team, Justin Berg, Chairman, Jim Burgess, and John Pinkerton. Fellas, thanks for being here. It's been a while since we've had Scope on. Justin, kick it off. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
And you have other team members who couldn't make it today. We have packed the house in the studio here in Atlanta, but you wanted to give a shout out to your other fellas.
Yeah, we have a robust team. Not here today, Nick Edinger and Cody Diamond. Together, the five of us are working as hard as we can for the Delta pilots.
Thanks for being here. Laura, kick it off for us.
All right, so we're not going to go basic. What is Scope? If you don't know what Scope is, check out Section 1. How are things going right now?
Things are going okay, I would say. There are some areas that are working really well. There are some areas where we have disputes with the company. Global Scope is an example of something that's working well for the Delta pilots. The other areas of Section 1, we have some disputes, and we can talk about that a little bit later, but
yeah,
suffice to say, there are things that we would like to see working better.
Let's crack it wide open. So, as Laura mentioned, Scope, I think everybody generally understands what Scope is. There's a reason that it's Section 1 of the contract, because without Scope, there's no need for the rest of the contract, right? And so in my little pea-brain vision, Scope protects the jobs, the flying that we do as Delta pilots. That's talking about international, that's talking regionals, less than 50 seats. So it's kind of an all-encompassing what we do. And I don't know if this is worth going into, but I looked into the Major League Baseball Players Association, right? So it's the players union for the Major League Baseball players. They have a scope. They have a Section 1 scope. And it's like, wow, you need scope to play baseball. But it makes sense for them too, because if team owners are just outsourcing their jobs to, say, Japan, and they're making money from leagues in Japan, then why would you pay $50 million salaries to players here when you can outsource and make the same amount of money? And so that exactly applies here at Delta. Outsourcing flying, sending it to partners, sending it to other countries perhaps. That's kind of a reason why Scope is so vital to our contract and to our livelihoods.
I think it's a good analogy. Section 1, like you said, you hit the nail on the head. It ties the work that we do as pilots for Delta to pilots on the Delta pilot seniority list, and just that list, right? And then Section 1 goes on to name some specific instances with specific limitations on where that flying can be outsourced to pilots not on the pilot seniority list.
Okay. Getting further into the meat and potatoes here. So things that pilots are aware of. So you mentioned global scope. This is something that was recently negotiated a couple years ago. It was in conjunction with our Section 6 negotiation, but it was a separate agreement. If everybody remembers, they had to vote on it independently of the contract. And without going too far into the nuts and bolts of global scope, you're saying that's been working for us. How has that been working for us?
Global scope was the first of its kind agreement in the industry. And what it did for the company was it allowed for more flexibility in Delta determining where it flew and how often, how much. What it did for us is it made a more defined reciprocity for when Delta grows or Delta's partners grow, that the global scope ensures that we as Delta pilots are sharing in that growth equally, or at least equally.
Right. A 1-to-1 growth is the ratio we fought for and got. And then I think the other important piece of this is the remedy. So if the company violates scope, the remedy is wide-body positions.
Correct.
Which equals, in the words of a great friend, the currency of our seniority and career progression is tied to wide-body positions, career progression that makes room for new hires. So it's a big ball of wax that we're talking about when we talk global scope and the remedy. Instead of money that we all split 17,500 ways and we've got enough for a 30 rack. Instead, now we have career progression and something that affects all of us.
Exactly. It's a more appropriate way of measuring when the company starts to get outside the limits. Again, Section 1 is jobs, right? So If we ever have to get to the point where we have to go into remediation, if Delta didn't have enough wide body flying, the appropriate solution should be they need to add more, right? And that's what it does.
So that's global scope. How is it going? Is the company doing what they're supposed to be doing? Are we needing to add wide body positions?
So global scope's been going well. I think one of the strengths of global scope is that it is based upon block hours, and that's a very easy metric to track. Our partners fly this many block hours. We fly this many block hours. And so as our partners are growing, we are growing, and it's going well. So that's one of the benefits, is how transparent the tracking of this is. And it makes it easier for Delta to track it, and it makes it easier for us as the monitors to say, yes, you're in compliance. The other part is that the remedy phase, it's an immediate. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's if they have hour shortages, that turns directly into pilot shortages. So they know what the cost of doing business of not following it is. So one, it's transparent. And two, there's a clear path if they violate the contract, which then makes it easier for them to see the cost and stay in compliance. So we have been seeing a lot of growth in our partners and in our wide body fleet. So I think both from a pilot perspective of how much flying we're getting, it's been good, but it's also been good for the company because they get to go where they want.
Okay. And have we needed that remedy?
No, we have not.
Okay, so that's good to know because
it's working.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's working. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. A remedy hasn't been needed yet.
Correct.
We've all walked down the terminal and you see all the partners flying the routes that Delta flies as well. If you go to Orlando, it's Virgin Atlantic City down there. But knowing that when you're like, why aren't we flying that flight? Why aren't we flying that? Oh, we go to London. We should be flying this flight. Just know that the global scope agreement is working in our favor.
Correct. In fact, our perspective is when we see headlines saying, hey, our partner is adding flying to the U.S., we go right on, because that means anytime the partner adds flying to the U.S., that means Delta also has to add flying. So our partners doing well, adding flying to the U.S. means it's going to be good for us as a result of global scope.
Right on, Jim. John, I want to ask you about what's not working. What's keeping you up at night?
Well, we do have some current disputes, and as the compliance and analysis portion goes, we do have reservations on the amount of information we get and the type of information we get in a timely manner. And that's always a concern, and we're continually to communicate with the company and try to make progress there.
Can you give us a tangible example of maybe a scope issue that you're working through right now?
I'll let Justin handle some of the outstanding disputes we have right now. We do have 5 outstanding in the grievance process and 1 in the arbitration process.
Okay. Yeah, I think pilots are just curious of like, well, how are they violating scope?
To elaborate on what John was saying, the company is required to give us certain information that we can only get from the company. And this information is what lets us see whether the company is in compliance with our scope or not. If we don't have a complete picture of what the company is doing, then we can't judge whether or not they're in compliance in certain parts. So lately, there have been instances where we haven't gotten that full picture of information, and that's the basis of some dispute that we have, and we're working through that right now. We're hopeful that we can come to a successful resolution on that, but it's a really big deal for us because if we don't see the full picture, then that's a problem.
Great point. Scope is, we think, wide bodies, international, big partners, but it also is on the other end of that, right? Like 50-seat RJs, regional flying, what can be outsourced. I feel like when I started at Delta, scope was heavily involved in the regional flying game. It wasn't so much the international flying, the partner flying. And then we had the big pendulum shift. You know, it's like a game of whack-a-mole, right? It is like a self-licking ice cream cone of, well, we solved the RJ problem, and now we have an international problem. And now we solved the international problem, and we're back to an RJ problem.
It would be accurate to say that we currently have all of those problems. But I can give you some specific examples. Like, for instance, the WNBA issue was something that we caught on our own. The company didn't tell us about it. We discovered that the company was outsourcing this flying improperly. When we started asking questions, the company did come and say, you're right, we did mess this up. And we're currently going through the grievance process to get to an appropriate remedy for that. Aeromexico, the company did exceed their limits for the amount of passengers they can put on Aeromexico in November of 2024. And that's something that they self-reported to us. That's an example of information that Delta is required to give us so that we can evaluate compliance. And they did tell us that they were out of compliance there. So now we're going through the grievance process on that issue too. And from our perspective, this may be just a few, like a handful of items, but if anybody listening is interested, you can go to dalscope.org, which is the website that previous scope committee put together to tell the pilots about what's happening before global scope became effective. So it has not been updated in quite a while. Serves now as essentially a historical record of how things were at Delta from a scope perspective back in 2019 and before. There's a violations page, and it talks about all of the different times that Delta violated our Section 1, and there are at least a couple instances that are on that page, violations that are still happening today. Like, for instance, Aeromexico. Delta has told us that they're going to fix the issue, and while we believe that they say that in good faith, these issues keep happening, and our job is to have them stop happening, right? Because when we say these issues, flying is happening that should be done by Delta pilots, and it isn't.
It's monitoring and enforcement, but then the end game is a grievance or arbitration, and then there's a decision there. Yes, there's a violation. No, there's not a violation, and here's the remedy.
That is one way. We prefer not to. We would prefer to work directly with the company to try to
Just
solve
have 'em
these
fix it,
problems.
right?
Yeah, just fix it.
Like, hey, we see you haven't cleaned your room. Would you like to go clean your room?
I wish it worked that well.
One other thing that I think I'd like to highlight is this is an information intense committee. And there's a lot of information that's out there that we just can't see. As we said, there's 2 grievances right now that are about wanting information from the company. And that came about because another Delta pilot said to us, hey, did you see this? This looks strange. Does that comply with our contract? And we said, no, but we can't really tell definitively. We need this information. And then we go and ask the company for that information specifically. So what I'm really getting at is we need all the pilots' help. If they see something that we joked earlier about seeing all the wide bodies down at Orlando, but if they see something that just doesn't pass their sniff test, give us a dart. We want to hear about it because that information might lead us to pulling on a thread somewhere that the company is violating. So there's a lot of information out there. As you heard, there's only 5 of us, and there's 17,000 pilots that could give us information or leads to look into. And that's quite frankly is how most of these violations were discovered. Is somebody said, hey, this looks strange. We said, we agree, and looked into it, and then went down the line.
I didn't realize that. So that's a great plug for, we joked about it, but if you're walking down the terminal and you're like, funny, I'm flying to Paris today and they're flying to Paris today. Yeah, bring it up. The worst case would be like, yeah, they're in compliance, no big deal. But like you say, there's opportunity there. There's potential that it's something that's gone unlooked.
And you guys want to get that information via a DART?
That would be the best way of getting in touch with us.
Submit a partner flying DART to the scope committee through dal.alpa.org, and we'll send you an Alpa fleet pin. It's the hottest new thing since a trading card.
It would be nice to get darts about scope. I just want to say most of the darts we get are about scheduling. We don't handle scheduling issues, I believe, in the DART scope, not scheduling.
Okay, so if you see anything out there, go ahead and send a DART over to the scope committee. They're excited to get your darts and investigate everything. Any parting words for the pilots?
Yeah, we had talked a little bit about how global scope looks. One of the biggest questions that we've gotten from pilots who would like to know more is, I saw this route that I used to love flying, like for instance, Raleigh-Durham to Paris. And now Air France is doing it. Why? What is up with that? And is it in compliance? The easiest answer is, look, global scope is all about block hours. And we don't necessarily look at routes individually. You can't look and see if the company's in compliance if you're just looking at routes, block hours. So I would have to say Yes, Air France did take over on a seasonal basis, Raleigh to Paris, but what we see on our end, and what you can see if you really want to dig into it, which you don't have to, but what we can see on our end is even though there are some routes that our partners took over, you look at Delta flying between, and I'm talking about Delta mainline international twin aisle wide body flying between the United States and South America, 2019 versus 2024, Delta's flying increased by over 30%. The same thing for looking at increased flying to Australia and New Zealand. And those are really long legs. Like that's a lot of block hours. One leg from LA to Sydney is worth a lot more than Raleigh to Paris. So that's the flexibility that the company has. If the company says, we actually want our partner to do this one in particular, and over on the other side, we can see Delta's now flying this other leg. There's the block hour, the reciprocity that we're seeing and the flexibility for Delta in a real example.
That all makes sense. I know a couple Air France pilots, and they're always like, why do we go to Cincinnati? We'll take Auckland and Sydney. All right, fellas, Justin Berg, Jim Burgess, and John Pinkerton, the Scope crew, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for what you do in protecting Section 1, our scope. We appreciate it.
Thank you guys for what you do. I listen to you all the time.
Yeah, thanks.
First-time caller.
First-time caller, long-time listener.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, guys.
You're listening to Engage, the podcast for Delta pilots. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform, and receive notifications when a new episode is available.